One day at a time.
It's that real this time around. Lock and load.
Get on your knees.
This is the point of no return. I can never go back. Life without parole, upstate, shackled and trapped. Living in the hole, looking at the world through a crack. That I'd rather shoot it out and get clapped. I've gone too far, there ain't no coming back for me. Auschwitz gas chamber full of Zyklon B.
Welcome to Orwellian Optics, the podcast that clarifies modern finance through a macro lens. Brought to you by Allio Capital. We're here to break down how macroeconomics, policy, and political power impact your personal finances and your family's future. Experts agree geopolitics is the biggest risk to your portfolio. We're on a mission to cut through the noise, challenge conventional wisdom of investing, and arm you with the insights you need to stay ahead of the game. Together, let's dissect these critical topics and reclaim control of your freedom and financial future. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Orwellian Optics, a podcast by Allio Capital. I'm your co-host, Chief Executive Officer, Joseph Gradante. I'm here with my co-host, Chief Investment Officer, AJ Giannone. What's up, AJ?
Hey, Joseph. Glad to be back. Headlines are hitting us fast and hard this week, so really excited to talk with you guys about, how the intersection of these things really affects markets and how we can kind of analyze them from a first principles perspective. But Tyler, glad to see you're safe and sound there in your new spot, and looking forward to talking over some of this great stuff with you here, man. How's it going?
Yep, the headlines just keep coming, so we've got a lot to dig into today, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, so I'm excited today because we're gonna kick it off with a video that really kind of underscores why Allio Capital exists as a firm. And it's a video of JD Vance, and he's addressing an audience. And what's really interesting about this audience is that on one side you have workers and populists, and the other side you have the ownership class and the innovators. And you don't really see these two groups come together too often. And so, but yeah, without further ado, let's listen to the video.
Because there were two conceits that our leadership class had when it came to globalization. The first is assuming that we can separate the making of things from the design of things. The idea of globalization was that rich countries would move further up the value chain while the poor countries made the simpler things. You would open an iPhone box and it would say designed in Cupertino, California. Now, the implication, of course, is that it would be manufactured in Shenzhen or somewhere else. And yeah, some people might lose their jobs in manufacturing, but they could learn to design, or to use a very popular phrase, learn to code. But I think we got it wrong. It turns out that the geographies that do the manufacturing get awfully good at the designing of things. There are network effects, as you all well understand. The firms that design products work with firms that manufacture. They share intellectual property, they share best practices, and they even sometimes share critical employees. Now, we assume that other nations would always trail us in the value chain, but it turns out that as they got better at the low end of the value chain, they also started catching up on the higher end. We were squeezed from both ends. Now, that was the first conceit of globalization. I think the second is that cheap labor is fundamentally a crutch, and it's a crutch that inhibits innovation. I might even say that it's a drug that too many American firms got addicted to. Now, if you can make a product more cheaply, it's far too easy to do that rather than to innovate. And whether we were offshoring factories to cheap labor economies or importing cheap labor through our immigration system, cheap labor became the drug of Western economies. And I'd say that if you look in nearly every country from Canada to the UK that imported large amounts of cheap labor, you've seen productivity stagnate. I don't think that's not a total happenstance. I think that the connection is very direct. Now, one of the debates you hear on the minimum wage, for instance, is that increases in the minimum wage force firms to automate. So a higher wage at McDonald's means more kiosks. And whatever your views on the wisdom of the minimum wage, I'm not going to comment on that here. Companies innovating in the absence of cheap labor is a good thing. I think most of you are not worried about getting cheaper and cheaper labor. You're worried about innovating, about building new things, about the old formulation of technology is doing more with less. You guys are all trying to do more with less every single day. And so I'd ask my friends, both on the tech optimist side and on the populist side, not to see the failure of the logic of globalization as a failure of innovation. Indeed, I'd say that globalization's hunger for cheap labor is a problem precisely because it's been bad for innovation. Both our working people, our populace, and our innovators gathered here today have the same enemy. And the solution, I believe, is American innovation.
When you talk about globalization, right? Well, let's start with where we're now. Let's start in the present. All this talk about tariffs and the threat of tariffs, right? It's really about this cheap labor system that we've become dependent on over the past, 40 years. And I think it's interesting, because you can go back to the Gilded Age, um, when you had worker uprisings in, the coal mines, in the oil fields, in the iron ore mills, and guys like Carnegie and Rockefeller would send in the federal government to quell those labor movements. But over time, eventually, it led to unions, right? And then after, World War II, in the face of death, we were all equal. And so there came to be this accepted symbiotic relationship between the ownership class and this new middle class, right? Because for the first time in human history, there was a middle class, and you had, a very high standard of living in America. Um, Allio Capital, we base a lot of what we do off of, the principles of Ray Dalio, that he talks about in the book, Principles for Dealing with a Changing Global Order, Why Nations Succeed and Fail. And in that book, he talks about how at one point, America accounted for over 50% of global production, and how production creates wealth. And you go back to when America was at its strongest, we had tariffs, right? We had tariffs, and we had trade policies that kept production here in America because it kept wealth here in America. We had the comparative advantage. But the ownership class, going back to really Rockefeller II, um, he was in the I believe it was the 20s, going to Korea and Eastern Africa, looking for cheaper labor because he was wondering how he was going to deal with these worker uprisings. And so later on, his sons, David Rockefeller, Lawrence Rockefeller, they were really the chief catalysts for this globalization movement. And it wasn't at the best interest of America. And why? Because capital, right, is mobile and labor is not. Alan Greenspan wrote a paper on this. But to tie this all together, um, what I find to be so paradoxical is Thomas Piketty wrote a book, Capital of the 21st Century. And this book was a darling of the left when it came out, right? And it talks about this very concept. And so Donald Trump, and this is why I'm always saying Donald Trump and his initiatives are very left of center. Because when you look at the Democrats, right, and you look at the fact that they outraised Republicans 4 to 5 to 1, they are, you go to most country clubs in this country and it's all Democrats. It's the billionaire, it's the billionaire class, it's the elites, because they benefit from this system. And what most people don't realize is that it's a system that's predicated on slave labor, right? I mean, we wouldn't buy products if it was you wouldn't buy, if you knew that the South still had slaves and they were producing cotton, would you buy those products? No. If you knew that products were made by Irish indentured servants in the North, would you buy those products? No. So why is it okay that we buy products that are made by slaves in China, who have no rights, who have high suicide rates? There's no diversity. It's a, borderline fascist, closed society. And yet that's really kept from the general American public. And so it all goes back to when I say why this is one of the foundations for Allio Capital existence, is because our mission is to promote economic literacy. And when you look at the current modern day left, people like AOC and Jasmine Crockett, they are what Lenin referred to as useful idiots, because they promote open borders. They don't care, they don't want us to, drill for oil or frack it, offshores here in America, but yet they're okay with us buying foreign oil. It's just the stuff that they espouse makes no sense. And, I'll close with this. They talked about the 1950s and the fact that, the top marginal tax rate was, 80 to 90% in the 1950s.
but yet they don't talk about the fact that we had different trade policies and tariffs in the 1950s, and that all production was here. They failed to, so if you were to impose, any of the policies that they espouse without having labor, a system that incentivizes labor to be kept here, it wouldn't matter. It would just lead to our decline, our impoverishment, and continue to empower and, continue to move China up on the world stage, and Americans would see their standard of living continue to decrease. I know that was a lot. So, AJ, what are your thoughts after hearing that speech by JD Vance?
Yeah, it just echoes a lot of I think the sentiment that has started to kind of bubble up around, these conversations and through the populist movement, that the workers and the people who would have historically filled out the manufacturing base of America and afforded themselves a career of, additive value, receiving fair benefit from their employers for their efforts. That whole cohort of people was effectively sold out as a line item on the capitalist balance sheet in their income statement. So, at some point, the stage model that the innovator class and the capital class use to define, how do we build a sustainable and successful American capitalist value creating system, was sold down the road for how do I maximize my profits today at the exclusion of a sustainable future for this business. It became, make money this quarter, make money this year, and let's not worry about the future, because we're in that future now. And what we see is that there's not enough wealth and income from the American populace to actually sustain the growth that we need to continue to thrive as a country. So to your point, Joseph, there today, if you want to move goods around the world, you do it the same way that you did 200 years ago, by boat. With all the technology and the airplanes and all kinds of, the internet, you still need to move cars, iPhones, clothes by boat from one side of the world to the other side of the world. So while it may be slightly cheaper, you can't lay the blame for globalization at the foot of technology, because the mechanism by which those goods move between countries is still the same as it was for the last, however many hundreds of years. So what that means is, to me, there has been a decided and concerted effort to change the rules of the game in a way that benefits the people who own capital and to the detriment of the people who provide labor. And you've seen now the natural consequences of that. So, when Vance gets up there and addresses both the innovator capitalist class and the populist class with a message that is his attempt to kind of unify this argument and bring us back to a direction whereby both parties can benefit if we move in the direction of trying to create a contained economic engine inside the borders of America and not rely on this, to use his analogy, drug of cheap labor to continue to propel profits higher and higher, while sharing fewer and fewer of the spoils of that endeavor with fewer and fewer people, then that gets us actually on a path of sustainability again, where, the people who are consuming the products that are made are earning that money by producing those products. And over time, the efficiencies, the population growth, the manufacturing increases, the technology innovations, all of that builds on itself in a sustainable way. And you may not have these massive disparities where, CEOs are earning, 700 times the median worker value, but, those are few and far between. We need to bring the average median worker salary to a level that reflects their contribution to the economy, and not, so far past the point where they're effectively being exploited for their labor in a way that belies their really lack of bargaining power at the table. And, your point about unions really shaping that narrative is key to that, because once the people who were writing these checks, hey, I'm going to go find employees, I need labor to produce my products. Once they figured out, hey, I can just go, get the cheapest available labor ever, that was the shortcut around union negotiations. Unions spent all this time and effort building these protections, building their position, building their power at the negotiating table. And then they changed the rules so that they could just go, over to, Indonesia or Vietnam or, wherever and say, hey, we don't need you guys anymore. You negotiated for all these things in fairness, your place at the table. And now that's all out the window. So that's what we're left with.
I remember a time when the Republican Party, this is when I was a kid, and I remember even, hearing my uncle talk about it's all about it's the unions. It's the unions causing these problems. It's the unions. And, and I look back at that, like, places like the Cato Institute, which thank God Tucker Carlson rescinded his membership there. It was preposterous. It was absurd that it was the unions, right? I mean, what unions did. I mean, don't get me wrong. There was corruption in unions and all that. I mean, there's always anomalies. But in general, it was good when what was good for the goose was good for the gander. It was good for our country, right? That's what I'm trying to get at. Because the people at the top, they were doing very well. They were still the wealthiest people in town. It basically went from being multimillionaires to multi-billionaires at the expense of the middle class. I mean, they cut out an entire class of people. There was a time when you can have, one person in a household working, and the family can have 4 kids. They can have 2 cars, a 2-car garage, and they could still take a vacation every year to Martha's Vineyard. And why wouldn't we want to, try to bring back that system, knowing that we still have the comparative advantage when it comes to things like intellectual property rights, innovation, how much longer we're going to have that advantage given our debt levels, that's another question. But I think everything that Donald Trump's trying to do right now, from an economic perspective, it's actually, very left of center, in my opinion, because, the tax cuts and the deregulation, I mean, that's really just a way to kind of offset and pay for, some of these tariffs and these other policies to really, again, incentivize production here in the US, right? If you raise taxes, right? Like what the left thinks that they can do is just, oh, we'll just raise taxes. We'll just raise taxes. No, because capital will just leave, right? And this story has played out, and Allio addresses this in his book, right? And so wealth will just leave the country, and it'll truly lead to Venezuela style conditions in the US. That is not impossible. Venezuela was once a wealthy nation. I mean, we already see it where you have a political class that's enriched. I mean, look at the Bidens. Look at somebody like Barack Obama, who was just a community organizer, and he's worth $70 million. I mean, all of these politicians, are getting rich in Washington. But what they don't realize, both sides, is that eventually the snake eats itself, right? It's only this system of like, oh yeah, we're going to benefit from, taking these kickbacks from these different industries at the expense of the worker and the middle class. But eventually, what happens when the currency is completely debased and the country's bankrupt, right? What do we do then? And so, I really wish, guys like, Mark Warner and some of these, more moderate senators, Senator Fetterman would come together and work with Trump and really solve this issue, because we have an opportunity right now to do something, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And that's really bring production back to the United States and really, see an American Renaissance. And in Allio Capital, we are truly committed to that American Renaissance. Tyler, what are your thoughts on this?
So has the Renaissance already started? I mean, and I'll give you a couple of stats here, but I think we all agree that a solid middle class means a solid America. That's how it's been for a very, very long time until just recent decades. If the middle class does well, America does well. Globalization sold out the middle class. So Trump thinks he has an answer for it, and that's twofold. Tariffs, obviously, and also cutting government very extensively. And we're going to see here over the next couple of years how that all plays out. But do we already have some signs that it may be working? I think Apple, for instance, has pledged several $100 billion investment in, I know, at least one factory in Texas, and I think there was a few other locations. NVIDIA pledged, I think, on the order of 70 to 100 billion in U.S.-made chips over the next couple of years. You have countries like the EU, India, I think even Vietnam was one of them, that are proposing at least to renegotiate trade deals with us to potentially lower, tariffs from both sides of the pond, so to speak. So now none of these things have happened yet, but I think
Saudi
they're
Arabia
good.
as well has also
Was
proposed a pretty
another
big
one.
investment in the United States, bringing a lot of innovation here. I think it was a few $1 billion actually.
So I would say those are encouraging signs. Nothing has happened yet. This is all very new. Trump's only been in office, a handful of days at this point, but at least he is shaking things up. And it seems like at least some people are willing to come to the table, which I think that's great news. If it brings manufacturing back here, increases jobs here, brings back kind of that American Renaissance, maybe we are just seeing the very tip of it at this point. So I hope that continues. I guess we will see how it plays out, but I think at least some of the news so far has been very encouraging.
And I just want to add there, like, it's actually been refreshing to me to see, leadership of the country acknowledge our position in the world and our predicament. You know, it seems like past administrations, even going back, the Clinton days, had this attitude of, hey, we're number one. We always will be number one. We don't have to worry about maintaining that position. We can just spend, we can invest, we can get involved in costly wars, we can do kind of whatever we want. And it's just taken as granted and as inevitable that we're going to maintain, our global primacy. And that's obviously ridiculous. So, from that perspective, when you see someone like Trump come in and actually acknowledge, like, hey, our fiscal situation is unsustainable. Our middle class has been hollowed out. None of this will last forever if we don't do something. At least he's acknowledging that something needs to be done, as compared to some of these administrations that have kind of come in and just said, yeah, just business as usual. Another 4 years, we're just going to keep, doing things the way we have been. And, if we end up another $8 trillion in debt at the end of this as a country, then that's just the cost of doing business. And, at some point, Joseph, like you said, the gravy train kind of ends, the currency becomes worthless. People lose faith in the ability of the government to act as, the lender of last resort and the global creditor. And, what that means, I think in my view, is that we actually have an opportunity now to renegotiate some of these, not just trade deals, but bilateral agreements as allies, as enemies. Like, there are valuable things that the US has done for the last 50 years with respect to our position in the world that we were not nearly compensated for in equal terms, in terms of the value that we created or the value that we provided. Global defense, trade, route protection, ensuring, the fair and equitable business arrangements between countries kind of were upheld during certain, tumultuous times. And, there are situations where our banking system has provided kind of the stability that the rest of the world really leaned on to prop up their financial systems, go back to '08, and situations like that. So, to me, it's really refreshing to see someone come in and acknowledge that, hey, we're not necessarily going to be number one forever, but if we take action today, if we leverage the things that we can do today, the assets that we have, the relationships that we have, the power that we've accumulated, and use it in a way to revitalize the middle class, to make sure that we're getting equitable value for the things that we're doing as a country, and make sure that our consumers and our citizens who are contributing to the economy are being remunerated in a way that, makes them have the opportunity to build a life, to have a career, and accumulate wealth, and have that financial security. All of that is long overdue. So it's really encouraging to see Vance and Trump kind of aligned in that way, and trying to get both sides of the aisle on board, between the capitalists, the populists, the Democrats, the Republicans. It's not a party issue. This is a America issue.
Yes, and I myself consider myself to be a utilitarian. I don't, I tend to lean more Republican, because I think, at this point in time, they are currently the party that is pushing sound economics. And I think, something that I think we'd be remiss to not address within this conversation is, what's happening, with DOGE. And I just want to show this small clip here, because there was this kind of perception out there that DOGE is a bunch of young kids in hoodies playing Call of Duty, in their mom's basement and making these big decisions in Washington. And when you look at the professionals and the fact that these guys are making major sacrifices and doing their patriotic duty, it's worth looking at. But I like the part where, Elon Musk says that, this might be the biggest revolution since the original revolution. And if nothing else, it's certainly the biggest alliance between a president and the inventor since George Washington and Benjamin Franklin in the form of Trump and Elon Musk. And so let me just play this clip real quick.
The ways that the government is defrauded is that the computer systems don't talk to each other. So if the computer systems don't talk to each other, then you can exploit that gap, and fraudsters exploit that gap, take advantage. If, for example, there were over $300 million of small business administration loans that has been given out to people under the age of 11.
Well, actually, to add to it, it's 300 million under the age of 11 and over 300 million to over the age of 120.
Definitely
small business loans.
Correct.
Yes. The oldest American is 114. So it's safe to say if their age is 115 or above, they're fake. Or they should be in the Guinness Book of World Records. And we should not be giving out loans to babies. So the youngest recipient of a small business administration loan is a 9-month-old, which is a very, very precocious baby we're talking about here. So obviously it was just fraudulent. And they do terrible things. They actually will see that a kid's been born. They will steal that kid's social security number and then take out a loan and leave that kid with a bad credit rating. There was literally a baby. The terrible things are being done, is what we're saying. And we're stopping these terrible things.
And you can stop it? I mean,
we are stopping it.
The reason this is happening is because the two systems are not talking to each other.
Yes.
Right. And so you don't know at the Small Business Administration that you're giving a loan to a 9-month-old, which happened in one case, because you're not cross-referencing that with the Social Security Administration data that has birth dates. So that very, very simple fix eliminates tremendous fraud. And that there are multiple systems across the government where the systems are not speaking with one another. And if you just solve that simple problem, you would solve a huge amount of fraud.
Are you surprised?
So one of the ways that, like one of the key tricks that the fraudsters pull is that they will use the fact that someone is marked as live and as sort of just that Social Security number is marked as live in Social Security, and then get disability and unemployment insurance for a dead person. Because the databases don't talk to each other, all they got was from Social Security is like, is this person alive? Yes, they're not alive. It's falsely marked. Person is falsely marked as alive in Social Security. But they didn't. But that person, a fraudster can now get unemployment and disability from a dead person. This is happening all the time at scale.
Are you surprised at some of the legal efforts and some of the judges that have weighed in? There's about 8 or 10 now of these cases that are at least temporary holds. They're being challenged by the DOJ.
Right.
Are you surprised by that pushback?
Well, it's the DC Circuit is notorious for having a very far left bias, and when you look at the people close to some of these judges, where are they working? Oh, they're working at these NGOs. Oh, they're the ones getting this money. Does that seem like a system that lacks corruption? It sounds like corruption to me.
Last thing, do you guys all see this as a patriotic duty? I mean, is that really what this is about?
It's essential.
Very much
I
so.
do, 100%. I was running 5 businesses in Houston, and I left that. I left great people to do this, and my wonderful wife said, "Go for it," and here I am. But I feel like this is me giving back to the country.
If we don't do this, we're sunk. The ship, unless this exercise is successful, the ship of America will sink. That's why we're doing it. Well, this is a revolution, and I think it might be the biggest revolution in government since the original revolution. But at the end of the day, America is going to be in much better shape. America will be solvent. The critical programs that people depend upon will work, and it's going to be a fantastic future. But are we going to get a lot of complaints along the way? Absolutely. One of the things I learned at PayPal was who complains the loudest? And with the most amount of fake righteous indignation, the fraudsters. It's a tell. There's some of these NGOs that are crazy, like the $2 billion to Stacey Abrams' NGO that basically didn't exist and suddenly gets $2 billion awarded from the federal government. Why? And there are many such cases like that.
I think that most people, common sense wise, would say the fraud's got to end.
Yeah.
They're concerned about the 94-year-old mother who skips a check or somehow doesn't get what she's supposed to get.
Right. And what we're trying to say is actually that the 94-year-old grandmother is actually, as a result of DOGE's work, going to get her check. She's not going to be robbed by fraudsters like she's getting robbed today. And the solvency of the federal government will ensure that she continues to receive those Social Security checks, that Medicare continues to work, without which we're all doomed. The reason we're doing this is because if we don't do it, America's going to go insolvent. We're going to go bankrupt. And nobody's going to get anything.
Why are you guys all doing it? I mean, you can pipe up, but you don't have to be here, right? I mean, you don't have to be doing this.
I have blessed with 4 beautiful children, my wife and I. But we have a real fiscal crisis. And this is not sustainable. And what's worse, back to my children and everyone else's children, is we are burdening them with that debt. And it's only going to grow.
Steve, there's not a lot of hierarchy here. You guys are kind of all approaching it in different, silos, but with the same kind of goal, right? I mean, this is really Silicon Valley private sector colliding with government.
Okay, so the reason why I wanted to play that clip is because you look at what's happening to Tesla dealerships, and it's the left. What's so scary and so dangerous when you look at where we rank in terms of education, you look at the decline in the standard of living, and then you look at the policies that the left espouses. I mean, this is really this isn't, as you said, it's not Democrats versus Republicans. Really, there's this Marxist agenda against America. And, this is one of the reasons why at Allio Capital, our mission is to promote, economic literacy. Because in my view, right, I don't believe in Democrats versus Republicans. I think there's good Democrats. I think there's good Republicans. I like Donald Trump, but I also like, I like John Fetterman. I like Senator Warner. A lot of guys I like, on the GOP side at the House level, guys like, Thomas Massie and Speaker Johnson, JD Vance, Ted Cruz, on and on, Susan Collins. So there's people I like on both sides. My favorite Democrat of all time was obviously JFK and, Dennis Kucinich. But those Democrats, for the most part, there's you still have Fetterman and you have Warner. But other than that, for the most part, when you look at what's in the House, what's in the base, these are not people who are pro-America. They want to topple America. These are the people that were tearing down our statues, that hate our fundamental way of life, that hate freedom. And they are completely ignorant to economics. And if they ever had power, the standard of living is declining already. But if they ever had control of all 3 branches of government, the standard of living would decline in a way that people don't understand. And so, in my eyes, the universal language is the language of economics, because economics applies to everyone equally, whether black, white, rich, poor, Democrat, Republican. We are faced with this issue of scarcity and limited resources, right? And so that's why we can't just take in everybody. We can't just, that's why when they were, taking in all these people from Mexico and Venezuela, part of the reason I think for that was really to bankrupt. I think there's these globalist interests out there that are people like Klaus Schwab and George Soros that are against the nation state, that want to see America bankrupt. And it makes me think back to when Ronald Reagan said, we're one generation away from losing freedom. And now we see that generation that's out there. But if we could really get people to understand economics on both sides of the aisle, it's this universal language that we at Allio Capital believe can bring people together in the interest of America and do what's best for America, for all of us. It's not like there's a lot of things Republicans do that I also don't like, right? And so I think George Washington was the one who had it correct that said, political parties are going to be dangerous to the republic because they would put their own interests above that of the country's. And we're seeing that come to fruition, and we're seeing the demise, of our beautiful republic. But if we can really accomplish our mission to promote economics within the paradigm of investing, in my opinion, that has a chance to really, um, be the kryptonite to what the left is trying to espouse, which is division along racial lines, division along class lines, and most, I think, has this idea that government could be a solution. Government does not care about you. Government cares about itself. Government is there to enrich itself. Absolute power, corrupts absolutely. And at the end of the day, there has to be this commitment to the Constitution and freedom. And that doesn't mean that you can't have some level of progressive taxation. I actually believe in progressive taxation. I believe that we shouldn't have homelessness. I believe that every man, woman, and child has a right to housing and a certain standard of living. But I think in this era of AI and data science, that if we would work together, we could accomplish that. But it requires everybody to come together under the umbrella of economics to really have public open discourse on how we solve our problems. And this division is absolutely, it's a threat to everything that we've built over the last 300 years. And so with that, AJ, I just want to, kind of uh, tee up some, because obviously what we do here, we're an investment company and talk about markets because, you're seeing all this volatility still in markets and market, obviously tomorrow is going to be, this big announcement on reciprocal tariffs. And this is where, we're seeing, I think, about a 30% chance of a recession, still a 70% chance that a recession is not going to happen. Consumer balance sheets are still relatively strong, though they're being stretched. Yeah, you're seeing, PE ratios coming down a little bit. I know in my view, time in markets is always kind of a fool's error, but, what are you thinking in terms of, where do valuations start to look attractive? And, because what I'm certain of is that once there's no way the Republicans are going to let the biggest tax increase in history go through. And so once we kind of get clarity on these tariffs, as we've been saying, and these tax cuts that go through, we think 26 and 27 are going to be the beginning of an American Renaissance and new golden age in America. But what are you looking at as our star investment guy here in terms of where things look attractive in terms of where people can start buying in?
Yeah, it's a great highlight, Joseph, because we're in an era of elevated uncertainty. When you look around the financial media and really the traditional media, you see all this talk about, elevated uncertainty, volatility is elevated. We don't really know what to do. You see a rotation underway right now out of some of the growth assets that have propelled the market higher in 23 and 24 and into some more defensive style assets. So you're seeing, rotations into fixed income, into bonds, into high quality equities. So the traditional, low volatility equities, the quality equities, the value equities, the dividend paying equities that have that kind of embedded margin of safety. What you're also seeing is, I think there's still really a premium to be paid for some of the large cap growth names, even though we've kind of had a little bit of a correction, 10+% depending on where you look, and maybe a little bit more from the Mag 7 names. They're still relatively expensive on a historical basis. And that's even taking into account the expected growth. And, one of the ways, people look at PE ratios and it's just one side of the story. But, if you told me I could buy, a company with a 30 forward PE that also had a 60% 5-year expected EPS growth rate, that's cheap to me. You're paying a lot in PE terms, but you're getting a lot in earnings growth terms. So it really depends on that relationship. And one of the interesting things that, that I'm looking at is, as we start to see this uncertainty kind of take hold over the next, weeks and months here, I think there's going to be opportunities to catch some of the names that the weaker hands are uncertain about. I think, one of the interesting points that we've seen is there's a record amount of household wealth in equities right now. And I think a lot of it is due to the bull run that we've had over the last, call it 15 plus years since '08. And, you've seen this flow into 401k balances, into retail investor accounts. And a lot of that is money that people just listen, oh yeah, go buy index funds, hold it forever. It's going to be fine. They got used to 10+% annual returns. And, through this period here where you're seeing this uncertainty and this volatility and some of these big brand names sell off, you're seeing, some of these weaker hands start to lose confidence in that narrative. And the way that I think that we're playing it, the way that a lot of folks that I'm reading have kind of mapped this out is that, at some point in maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's 6 months from now, we'll have a lot more clarity. But the time to get invested isn't once the risk is resolved, because that commands a higher valuation. That means we're already you're going to miss the opportunity. The time to get invested is, the Buffett style approach of buy when others are fearful and sell when others are greedy. So, now would be a reasonable time to start to look for deals in the market, in our view. You have to be selective with respect to the price you're paying. So, when you look at where PE ratios are today relative to where they were at the end of last year, we're down a little bit. But you have to look at a longer time cycle too, because it's not just year to year. It's multi-year cycles here that define PE ratio regimes. So, when you look at a 10-year average or a 5-year average of PE ratios for growth companies, the kinds of things that we think still have that embedded strength and quality of earnings growth potential, you're looking at that, 16 to 17 range of forward earnings valuation level to kind of say like, all right, this is a level where historically you've been well compensated for the risk that you're taking in some of these high growth names. So, it depends on the sector, it depends on the company, it depends on the opportunity, it depends on the macro landscape, but that's kind of a rough level that we're looking at here internally for when the opportunity starts to look attractive from a risk adjusted perspective. And, we're starting to see little bits of that. We're taking little bites of the apple here and there as this uncertainty narrative plays out. I think we're going to get an opportunity to take some bigger bites. But in the meantime, it's all about being tactical and being opportunistic. So, during periods like this where, markets are kind of going sideways to negative, sentiment's deteriorating, volatility's increasing, and people are just kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, you don't just have to sit there and take it. You can move into protective assets. Gold's a big one that has had a tremendous quarter. Fixed income is always that, flight to quality, safety trade style thing. So, you don't have to be perfect. And a lot of people, Joseph, I know you included, like timing the market is always tough. Time in the market as a converse is often a better approach, but it doesn't have to be 100%.
Well said. Well played there.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be 100% though. You could say, hey, I'm going to take a small percentage of my portfolio and make some little adjustments around the margin to try to, add a little bit of value here and there where it's very clear that, hey, maybe we got overextended. Hey, we're looking a little cheap here, without blowing up your total strategy. So, with that, I'll leave it back to you, Joseph and Tyler.
Yeah,
all that
I
makes
mean,
sense.
What's the quote? Everyone loves a good sale until it comes to the stock market. But there's always a logic to buying good companies at good prices. Regardless of what kind of market condition you're in, if you can get into solid companies and you can do it cheaper than you could have earlier, I'd say that's a net win, especially if you have a long time horizon. JJ said it a lot better than I could, but be greedy when others are fearful and be fearful when others are greedy probably sums up my thoughts pretty succinctly.
So with that being said, this really sums up our core conviction at Allio Capital, where, we believe in macro investing in the sense that we look at the market regime. We believe in diversification. We're not proponents of day trading, but we are proponents of making tactical shifts where you have conviction in the market, right? And so, you just heard from our chief investment officer where we have conviction. We're looking at a lot of these these AI companies and some of the Mag 7s as starting to get to that point where, they're starting to look attractive, because the question is, are they likely to be higher now in that 9 to 12 month period than they are today? And the answer is yes, right? Particularly if a lot of these policies go through on Capitol Hill, the tax cuts, obviously deregulation is coming. And should a recession come, then we might get, 1 or 2 rate cuts. And all that would be certainly, you know, be propellers of growth on the equity side. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to go to alliocapital.com and join the beta, join the American Renaissance, and, join the macro revolution. There's fintech, right? And there's everyone else. And then there's Allio Capital with the all-in portfolios powered by Altitude AI. But it's been another great episode. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. And peace, love. See you next time.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks,
fellas.
everybody.
Thanks again for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Be free, think macro, invest smarter by joining the macro revolution with the only investment app powered by Altitude AI. You can join the beta at alliocapital.com. Again, that's alliocapital.com. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a 5-star rating, click like below, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Stay free, and as always, God bless America.
This episode has been brought to you by Allio Capital. Get empowered to confidently grow your wealth while strategically managing geopolitical, monetary, and fiscal policy risks. Here at Allio, we combine professional macro investment strategies, personalized portfolio solutions, institutional grade data, and comprehensive wealth tracking into the only AI-powered financial investment app to help you achieve your financial goals independently. Be free, think macro, invest smarter. For more information, download the app now or visit us at alliocapital.com.